We begin in Washington, D.C. this morning, though, where Treasurer Jim Chalmers has spent the day arguing Australia's case to be exempt from Donald Trump's steel and aluminium tariffs. And in a positive sign, his American counterpart has hinted that things were so far so good. Our Washington correspondent Annalise Nielsen, she joins us live now. Annalise, did they make any progress?
Well, look, they met for a few hours this morning at the ambassador's residence in Washington, D.C. before they headed to this summit at the Australian Embassy. So this summit was designed to showcase the amount of money Australians have put into their superannuation accounts that are now being invested around the world, but significantly in the United States. They're really emphasising this point because Donald Trump loves nothing more than to say he's done a good deal. And so what they can do with this is say you've got $2.7 trillion in these superannuation funds. This is being invested in America. You can point to jobs and say we've created these American jobs here, and that's exactly what Donald Trump wants, and especially what he wants to point to if there is an exemption granted to Australia for these steel and aluminium tariffs. Now, what the really critical thing is in all this is we're not special. There are these tariffs being levelled around the world. Their main focus right now is Canada and Mexico. But if Australia were to be given an exemption, we would be the ones that everyone else points to and say, if they get an exemption, why don't we? So they're holding Australia up on a few different fronts to say, hey, we have the US has a trade surplus with Australia. We don't manipulate our currency. We have a free trade agreement. We put money into your defence industry. What more could you want? And so this is the game that's being played at the moment. They're showcasing what Australia has by having these events. They're meeting with all the officials around Donald Trump, who we have to remember, very different setup from what we saw in 2016-17 when Donald Trump came in the first time around. These are people who are loyal to Donald Trump and to his ideas. They are pro-tariffs as being an economic measure to manipulate and boost the economy here in the United States. And so these are the voices Donald Trump will be listening to when he ultimately makes that choice. It's been said that there's no point in engaging with the people around Donald Trump like this because they can't make a guarantee one way or the other. That doesn't take into consideration just how complex these negotiations are, just how many things they're considering when these decisions are eventually made, and who gets to be in the room to put the idea in Donald Trump's head when he does make the call. So Scott Bessent was the key person at the embassy today. He made this comment when Kevin Rudd was asking him in a Q&A about, well, Australia's ticking every single box that you want to use tariffs to beat out of your allies and enemies. What more could we possibly do? We must be looking pretty good to get an exemption. So when he says so far so good, that's about as good as we can hope for in the brutal world of negotiating tariffs. What we have seen is Jim Chalmers, when he fronted the press later today and he was asked about what does this mean for the Australian relationship with the United States? Why are we being dragged through all of this when we're such good allies? We're always there and we're actually doing everything they want. And he, again, was giving that caution to say, look, it's no one person's decision. This is not anything singling out Australia. The relationship is still strong. This is how Donald Trump is approaching the economy.
But at the end of the day, this will be President Trump's call. I think that's well understood in the administration and certainly in our government and in our discussions. My task here in DC wasn't to try and conclude that discussion, it was to try and inform it.
He also made the point that this was to continue the conversation. There were no solid conclusions out of it. And really, this will be a game time call from Donald Trump, because that's the exact method that Donald Trump uses to get his way in these negotiations, to exert his power. And we're just part of what is this global discussion. At the same time, the fact we are getting this access to so many senior members of the administration has boded well for Australia. But at the end of the day, it is a fickle business. And as much as we can do everything we can, what I'm told by the people who are really on the inside of what's been happening here is we're the envy of every other country in Washington, D.C. for the access we're getting, for the ability we're having to make our case. But it doesn't make us special. We don't necessarily get over the line until Donald Trump makes that final decision.
Yeah, that's true. Annalise Nielsen with the latest from D.C. Thanks, Annalise.